Maryanne Wolf è una neuroscienziata cognitivista da 25 anni, studia in particolare la lettura, perché e come l'uomo ha imparato a leggere, perché ha sviluppato questa funzione per la quale il nostro cervello in realtà non è fatto. Questo è quello che dice Maryanne Wolf proprio all'inizio del suo libro che è stato appena pubblicato da Vita e Pensiero, Proust e il calamaro, storia e scienza del cervello che legge, che comincia proprio così. Non siamo nati per leggere. Miss Wolf, we don't know when humans began to speak, but we know when they began to write. You say in your book it was a great jump for us.
Yes, indeed. We know that perhaps 2 million years ago, people were beginning to speak, and we have casts of their brain that show us that these speech and language areas were there. But reading took many, many more years to occur, and when it did, it was as if we made this great, fantastic leap forward. In fact, about 9,000 years before Christ was born, we were beginning to have symbols. We may have had symbols even before that. There are tiny hints. But at least 9,000 years BCE, we were beginning to have symbols for numbers, the numbers of wine barrels or goats. And these were little tiny symbols on tokens. But then somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 years BCE, that all changed. And whether it was the Egyptians or the Sumerians, we began to have a symbol system capable of giving our language a memory of its own, to preserve it. And so our symbols went from numbers to symbols of things and objects that were in our life. That happened very quickly. It was as if suddenly when we had just the beginning of this idea of symbol, the hieroglyphs and the Sumerian cuneiforms became large systems that were ever more complex and ever more capable, not just of recording our language, but in fact pulling us forward. So written language had several immediate effects upon us. It both preserved our past, and also in the act of writing, it was allowing us to have ever more complexity of thought and being able to, in fact, enlarge how we think because of what we are reading and our capacity to read.
But why did this happen?
This is a great mystery. Life and evolution are full of great mysteries. One possibility, and certainly we know this is the case, is there were rites of religions that were being carefully preserved. So part of it is our honoring of the gods that the Egyptians believed in and the Sumerians believed in. That was one piece of it. Economy was another. The first writings really are a combination of what we had to have for understanding what a particular temple was doing and the rites that would be passed down, the funeral services. And the other was simply the recording of how much we had. So economy and the gods were probably some of the first aspects. But then you had gentle things that were happening too. And far before people realize it, we had beautiful, almost encyclopedic treatises on the philosophy of a particular group, its medicine, its history. So you have really within 1,000 and 2,000 years wonderful things happening that were like encyclopedias of knowledge at that time. So human beings very quickly realized that the capacity to write was also the capacity to preserve what was known, and one could then build ever more quickly the next aspects of language and thought.
But we were not made to read.
Oh,
so what
no.
happened to our brain when we started to read it?
that first line that you read of my book is exactly correct. Human beings were never born to read. They were born to speak, to see, to move, to eat. All these functions were in our DNA. They flow out of our development when inspired by the environment. We become speakers. There's nothing in our brain that says, at year 1, you can recognize a letter. At year 2, you can put the letter with. Nothing like that is the case. Rather, reading is one of the most extraordinary examples of what is almost a miraculous property of the brain, and that is its plasticity, its ability to take its original parts, language, cognition, thinking, seeing, and connect them in a whole new way. So written language or reading is an example of the brain's capacity to rearrange itself and to go somewhere new. So cognitive scientists, neuroscientists, look to reading and to math as ways of studying what the brain does when it learns something new. So indeed, we were never born to read.
And when someone learns to read, we restart from the beginning. For
yes.
a child, it's a great job.
This is a very important concept for every parent and for every educator and for anyone who works with children. The brain doesn't have something like a clock that says you do this and then you read. It has to create a circuit, a new circuit. So every child has to create that rearrangement of that child's brain anew, afresh. That puts a great deal of responsibility on teachers. Parents too, but less so. But parents have a wonderful, I call it responsibility, but joy. One of the absolute best things that you could do to prepare a child to read is in the very beginning, when the child is an infant, read to them. Read to your children every single night. And what you're doing is introducing the child to the world of language, a new language. We don't speak in the text or the language of books, the language of fairy tale. That's what reading to our children does. So the other thing I wanted to say about this is that if a child has to form this new circuit, it puts this extra responsibility on teachers to realize that maybe 60% of our children will read very, I don't want to say totally naturally, but with our help, they will read and everything will be wonderful and fine. But there's 5 to 10% of our children who have real struggles, not because they have a disease or a disorder, but because their brain is organized in a different way from the start. You have to think about brains in a continuum. Before we had literacy, we had many kinds of brains. Literacy had nothing on this earth to do with us human beings, but human beings need a diversity of brains. And one of those diverse brains is a brain where the right hemisphere is especially important. These are our artists, our architects, our people who see patterns and recognize them. That brain, after we began to read, was still advantaged for its strengths, but disadvantaged for written language. This is the brain of a child with dyslexia. Dyslexia is not a disease. Dyslexia is a different organization for many, not all, but for most of our children who have dyslexia. It's a different organization. And teachers need to know that it's not that the children don't learn to read. It's that we don't know yet as well how to teach them. And we've developed programs in our lab and other places where we are literally helping the child with each part of that reading circuit learn to connect that circuit themselves, so that we are developing language processes, meaning, vocabulary, spelling. We're helping the child develop knowledge of the common patterns of Italian, of German, of English, and to be able to recognize them ever faster, and to put those patterns, those visual patterns, together with their knowledge of words, So knowing about words is so important for all children learning to read, but it's especially important for children with dyslexia.
And so parents has no responsibility in developing dyslexia in their children.
Parents, this is, by and large, this is often a genetic aspect. Our parents can do a great deal of good by simply making sure, whether their child has dyslexia or anything, to read and to give a lot of language to the child so that the child comes to kindergarten or the first grade knowing words and concepts. The parents, it's never anyone's fault. This is a gift. I want to say this very, very firmly. This is a gift. It's a gift, however, that has in the beginning a very hard experience for the children. They must never, ever be allowed to think they are less or dumb or lazy or not working to their potential. That is not true. It's just that their reading is slower to learn and less efficient because another part of the brain is doing a lot of the work. And we have to train and teach that child how to read in a somewhat different way.
Another important concept you put in your book is that now, for the first time, we are starting to read and learn in a different way. Our children use personal computer, we can say, as soon as they are born. They use Google, MSN, Facebook, write SMS, watch videos on YouTube. May they write and read more than we did, but it's quite different. What this will mean for them and for their brain?
Yes. I want to first say this is not an either-or situation. It's not that the digital world is bad and the classic reading brain is good. It's that both have advantages and areas of real caution for us as educators, science, and parents to be aware of. We who have developed this reading brain as we know it right now have no genetic program. When I say the brain was not born to read, there's no one way we learn to read. But the way we have learned to read has promoted our comprehension, our critical analysis, our imagination, our ability to read and have insight. There's deep reading that's going on at the end of our formation. Children who grow up immersed in a Google digital world have a world that's fast, full of distraction, able to multitask, but not necessarily able to concentrate and give the time necessary to the deeper reading, the reading that has inference, deduction, insight, epiphany, a constructive use of their imagination. All of these aspects of Google and YouTube and all these things, it's not that I want to say no to them. It's I would prefer saying later in development. First formation is of a comprehending brain in childhood. And I would like it ever more gradually introduced to this other mode of reading. Otherwise, my worry is that that brain, while certainly able to read, will be a surface reader, jumping from one information source to another ever faster and never having the time to probe and go deeply enough in their reading. So I think we would be, in essence, potentially forming a different kind of reading brain that will lose some of the capacity we have developed this far. So my wish is that we preserve the best of this deep reading brain and teach the child that first, and then of course the immersion into the digital culture will happen. We need do nothing for that, but we need to have children who are not constantly buffeted, bombarded by ever faster and ever more amounts of information, that they are too distracted ultimately to learn how to think their best.
But how can an adult try to convince a young boy that reading is important? And what would you say to a children of 6 who has his first book in his hands to
Yes.
convince him to open it?
Okay. I think it's much simpler and, of course, more complex than people think. When I said that the first part of reading should be under the arm of the parent, reading should begin in the beginning. You communicate your love from the start, and their natural curiosity will be activated, and they will want to read. So when my children were born, they were not born into this digital native, but very close. And every day, every night, I would read to them under the crook of my arm. We read to them until they were almost adolescents. They learned through us to love books. They are, of course, faster than I will ever be with computers and every kind of technological device. But they also have a love of reading. So it's communicating this, making our own love of books, which means we must also have that love of books preserved as well. We too, as adults, are changing as well. And I would ask all of us to think, how are we reading? For, as Joseph Epstein said, we are what we read. But I would like to suggest we are not only what we read, but how we read. So I would like us to learn never to lose that deep capacity, the imaginative, feeling reading brain as well. It's not just the children who are threatened. There is a bit of us.